Hilchos Shgagos Perek Shishi. Now we learn in the beginning of Perek Chamishi that Rabal Erva Bias Harbe Behela Machas. So even though there was Bein Bilu Beidlo Yom Harbe, or Behel V'le Nedel Bin Time, there was no idea Bin Time. And we're talking about the same Yisrael, Varei Guf Echad, we're talking about the same Guf. So therefore you only chayav one. So again, a person that was Ba, Ala Erva Bias Harbe, since it's the same Isser, it's the same Guf, and there was Lein Nedel Bin Time, so it's a Hela Machas, so therefore you chayav only one. That same din applies to macholas asuris. That if a person eats macholas asuris, even though he ate it many times, yom harbe, but nevertheless, since there was no yediyah b'intayim, so the mela was behela machas, he's chayiv al kolachas vachas. And vice to is behemsha will see that there's vice a chiddush that over here b'negea the bias we're talking about the same guf. So it was bias harbe and it was a guf echad. Masha'inkan over here by the macholas there was different macholas, different foods. So the there would be a svara that is haldera v'gufim, separate gufim. Nevertheless, we say in a tamchui mechalik, and even if it's different types of dishes, it's not mechalik, and certainly just different pieces of food, and therefore it's considered all a guf echot. And memela, when a person eats macholas harbe, even different days, and lepela was behelam echot, is ein chayv alachas. That's this halacha. Perek shishi. Din shigigas hamacholas kedin shigigas habeilis lefichach im ochel achilas harbe. And it was all mishem echot behelam achas. Zafal pi sheyesh b'neim yom rab. Nevertheless, ein chayav alachatas achas. The same like by beilis, it was bias harbe, and even was b'yom rab. So nevertheless, he's only chayav one. So the same thing by macholas ketzad. Achal chelev hayem, v'achal chelev l'mocher, and then again v'chelev l'mocher, 3 days. But it was all behelam achas. Zafal pi sheim b'shleisha tamchin. Even though obviously it's not the same piece of chelev. But Nachmer, it was different types of chalev. It was chalev, this was cooked, and this was baked, and this was roasted. Different types of chalev. But nevertheless, ain't ni chayev alachas, because it's considered one inyan, one avera, and the mela was behelam achas. Aval l'machal kezayis chalev v'nedale. And then v'chazer v'achal kezayis chalev v'nedale. So there was a yediyah b'tayim. So then it's chayev al kol achila v'achila. Sha'yediyah is mechalkes hashgagos. Because the idea causes that the shgagos should be separate shgagos. There was the shegig, the first shegig, and then there was a yediyah, and then there was a second shegig. So Mela, the second shegig is considered a separate shegig, and Mela yichayv two chatois. Now, ochel kechatzi zayis chelev, and then v'chazer v'ochel kechatzi zayis chelev, and it was all behelam achas. Is aval pi shein shnei tamchin, he ate 2 separate pieces of chatzi zayis, and there were 2 types of chatzi zayis. One was cooked and one was roasted. Is aval pi shehifsik b'neim, and there was a separation in time between eating the first chatzi zayis and the second chatzi zayis. But since it was behelam achas, is harei elu mitztarfin or mevi chatas. Because she'ena tamchin mechalkin, the fact that this was this type of chelev and this was this type of chelev is still considered the same isser. So Mamela basically ate the same isser chelev, all of it the kazayis, and it was behelam achas. Ababahu on the condition shaliyisha b'neim yesim mechdei achila shalish beitzim. In other words, it shouldn't take the time to eat both chatzi zaysim. B'neim doesn't mean in between the chatzi zaysim. B'neim means with the 2 of them. In other words, from the beginning of eating the first chatzi zayis until the end of eating the second chatzi zayis, there shouldn't take up more time than the amount of time that it takes to eat shalish beitzim, that's the k'dei achilas pras. K'misha b'yarnu b'hilchas macholas asuris k'shem shemitzdaraf ashir lemezid l'malkas. Just like the din which we learned already, that if a person is eating b'mezid and he was warned, and if he eats it, so if he eats it in more than k'dei achilas pras, he wouldn't be chayav malkas. But if he eats the entire kizayis b'chdei achilas pras, even though he didn't eat it mamish together, and he waited in between, and it was 2 separate tamchin, but nevertheless he's chayav malkas, is kach mitzdaraf ashir l'shegig l'korban. So mainly the fact that he ate it separately, and he waited in between, but as long as from the beginning of the eating until the end of the eating of the second chatzayis, he didn't take more than a k'dei achilas pras, which means more than eating sholish beitzim, so then he's chayav achatas. Halacha beis. Ochal noiser mechamisha zvachim, k'zayis mikol zevach behelam achas, is afach pi she'ochlam bechamisha tamchin, and he chayav alachatas achas. He ate noiser that came from 5 different korbanos, and they were done in 5 different types of dishes. So that's not considered achiluk. In other words, there's a shem noiser. The fact that this noiser came from this korban and this noiser came from this korban that's not called gufin muchalakim. As we learned before, by arayas, if it's gufin muchalakim, is chayav al kol echad ve'echad, even if it's the same shem iser. So what the Rambam is saying is that din is only by arayas when a person was born on this issue, on this issue. Masha'inkin beneged, the fact that he ate from different noiser, a noiser from this carbon and this carbon, that doesn't go into the gather of gufin muchalakim, and therefore is eini chayav al chatzas achas. Shekulam shem echadhem, v'atamchin eina mechalkim. And also, the fact that it's different dishes doesn't make a chiluk, and the fact that this noiser is coming from different karbanis also doesn't make a difference. Either way, he's only chayiv one if it was behelam echad. Now the pashtus, why isn't it called gufim muchalakim? So there's a svara that's brought down that gufim muchalakim is only by a balchai. When if it's not a balchai, over there you don't say gufim muchalakim. That's the first thing. When it's a balchai, it's two different balichaim, so then you say it's gufim muchalakim. Mashenkin over here, we're talking about the basar that was noiser, so the fact that this was noiser from this zavach and this was noiser from this zavach, the fact that this chaylev came from this behemoth, this chaylev came from this behemoth, doesn't make a difference. It's all the same shem chaylik, and there's no chiluk. The fact that this came from this behemoth, this came from this behemoth, or this came from this type of carbon, this came from this type of carbon. Now the Ram continues, v'chein hashoichet chamisha zvachim b'chutz behelam achas. There's a isser to shecht kotchim b'chutz is a isser karet. For that you chayiv malchus, and if a person is shechts chamisha zvachim b'chutz behelam achas, is also any chayiv alachatas achas. Halamazadema lemishtachve lechomish tzuris behelam achas. So just like when a person is mishtachve lechomish tzuris behelam achas, so he's only chayiv one. So al derazeh, if a person is sheichet chamisha zvachim behelam achas, he's also any chayiv one. Now over here, the Meforshim, yes, the Mishnah Melech talks about it, that lechura, over here it's already a balchai. Over here we're dealing with a balchai. You're talking you sheichet chamisha zvachim. The svara that lepel the b'shas hashchita becomes uis balchai. The question is when are you over the iser lechura if yeshnu l'shchita b'tchila v'atzeif, so lechura you over the iser milchatchila, you start being, when you finish the shchita is a glory milsel afraid that b'tchilas hashchita already you started being over the iser. I'll call upon him. The Rambam is saying clearly that a person shechts 5 behemoths bechutz, 5 behemoths of kachim bechutz, that's not considered gufin mechalkim. The Rambam compares it to mishtach v'lechomish tzuris. Now, when a person is mishtach v'lechomish tzuris, obviously it's not a din in the tzura. It has nothing to do with the tzura. The pshat is it's a din in you. You are mishtachva. The fact that you are mishtachva. So Memela, it doesn't pass to say that it's gufin mechulakim. Gufin mechulakim is when a person does an avera, and the avera is he engages with 5 different gufim. Masha'inkin over here, it's not, he didn't engage with those tzuras. The pshat is he was mishtachva, it was a din in him, and therefore he only has to, he brings only one. And the Rambam is saying that al derech zeh b'negei shchita. So it's brought down that Rabbi Vega brings down that this whole din of chomish noshim, guf mechulakim, is only when he's nana from the guf. When a person was the aveda of arayas, is that he's nana from the erva. So memela, so over here was this guf and over here was this guf. Masha'inkin over here when he was mishtachava, has nothing to do with being nana from the tzura. And now that is when he's being sheikhed, it's a din in him. He's doing a ma'aser shchita. So memela, this din of guf mechulakim doesn't apply. Maybe it needs further explanation, but that's in the Kudus Advarim. That guf mechulakim by arayas, there's a musik of guf mechulakim. When you go ahead and eat noiser, even though it's from different behemoths, it's not guf mechulakim. And al that is that when you sheikh it, kama behemoths, so that's not called guf mechulakim. It's you're repeating the same avera more than once, and therefore if it's behelam echas, you only chayiv achas al derech v'yamishtachel lechomish tzuris. Halachi gimel. Hikis dam lebehemtei, and lepel v'kible b'shnei cases. He was mekabel b'shnei cases, and v'shasam he drank both cases behelam achas. So the din is again any mevi lechatas achas because that's not called gufim mechalakim. He ate just like if he ate chela from 2 behemoths, or certainly 2 pieces of chela from the same behemoth from different parts of the behemoth. He's only chayiv one. So al derech over here he drank the blood of this behemoth, and although he was mekabel b'shnei cases, it's considered one thing, and therefore behelam achas is only chayiv one. Halacha daled ha'eichel macholis harbe mishemis harbe behelam achas is chayiv al kol shem v'shem. Just like we learned before, that if a person does arayas, if it's different shemis, so he's chayiv on each shem. And al that is that we learned that if you did the same if you did one Maisa Bia, and it was a woman that had her Kama Shemus, as long as those Shemus were Chal, because it was Bebasachas, or it was an Isser Mesa or Isser Kel, so the same applies to Achila. Nachamol. Ha'echel Macholis Harbi, Mishemus Harbi, Behela Machas, Chayev al Kol Shem V'Shem, Ketzat, Kin Sha'achal Chelev, V'Dam, V'Neser U'Pigel, and the Yeda Kazayis M'Kol Echad V'Echad, and it was Behela Machas, is maybe Arba Chatois. Even though he didn't realize of one Isser before he did the other Isser, but Lepel, since we're dealing with separate Isurim, so therefore he's Chayev on each one. V'chein Kol Kietze Beilu, V'chein, Ha'echel Kazayis Echad, Sh'Niskapzu Be'Shemus Harbi, Behela Machas. So he ate the same kazayas, but that kazayas had shemus harbe. Is im niskapzu b'isur meisiv, a b'isur kelu, a b'isur basachas. So therefore, there's no problem of ein isur chalal isur. So then chayiv al kol shem v'shem, just like by arayis. If you have an isha which has kama shemus, like we learned, so memeli you chayiv al kol shem v'shem lefichach. It'll be a hechatimtza of hatamei she'achal kazayas chelev, and this chelev was also neiser, and it was v'yem kippurim. So there was 4 problems over here. It's chayvi krisus. He was a tummy that achol kachim. He ate chelev, and this chelev was also neser. So there's tummy shachol kachim, and he's eating chelev, and this chelev is neser, and there's also be'em kippurim. So memela, so maybe arba chatois, and he also brings an osham because lepel is being nanem and a hegdish. Now the Ram teaches is chatas achas mitum tummy shachol is hakedesh, and va'achas mishum echol chelev. Va'achas mishum echol neser, va'achas mishum yom kippurim. Now by Yom Kippur, in order to bring the chatas for Yom Kippur, it's not enough to eat a kezayis, because for Yom Kippur you have to eat a kisevis in order to be chayiv. So therefore, v'hu yitztaref echol acharim kezayis zeh achi yishlimu l'kesevis, which a kisevis is like 2 zaysim, and therefore to be mashlim to kisevis you have to eat in addition to this kezayis. But if you eat this zayis plus another amount, in order for it to be a kisevis, he'll be chayiv arba chatois. And besides that, he's also maybe osham vadi lemila, because since he's being nanem and akedish, and he's not allowed to be nanem and akedish, and this was a shegig, so therefore he brings an osham vadi lemila, shari nanem and ahegdish b'shgagos. So that's a separate issur, besides the issur of the tummy shachol kedish, even if he wouldn't have been a tummy, the fact that he was a nanem and akedish when he wasn't supposed to, so therefore he's chayiv another carbon ila. Now, in order, how is he chayiv all 4? Why don't we say isser halal isser? So the cheshbon zazay that first he starts off it's chelev. Chelev is usser and he's chayiv kares for chelev. Now when this behema became a carbon, he was magdish the behema, and now he's tamei. So as a din tamei, he becomes usser not only on the chelev, but he's also usser as a tamei on all of the carbon. The entire carbon is usser to him, because a tummy is not allowed to eat a kachim. And therefore that's called an isur kailul, because he becomes usher not only on the chayla, but he becomes usher on the rest of the behema. So that's called an isur kailul, and therefore there's nitais of the isur of a tummy sha'achol kachim. Now this became nicer. So when it becomes nicer, so it becomes usher not only to him, but also usher legaveya. Until now it was mutter legaveya. Masha'inkin, now it's Asur L'Gaveya. It's Asur L'Gaveya, so therefore that's called an Isur Moisif. Moisif, we said, when it becomes Asur to another person. Al-Deraz over here, Kavayachal becomes Asur to the Mizbeach. So Memela, that's called an Isur Moisif, so it was Nitais of Isur Noiser. Now when it comes Yom Kippur is not only Asur on this, Yom Kippur is Asur on everything. Even all Macholis Mutarim are Asur Yom Kippur. So Mela comes out, so it's an Isur Kailus. So that Isur Kail of Yom Kippur is nitosef on what we had until now. So again, we started off with Chalev. Chalev is an Isur Karis. Then it became Kachim, and he's Tamei. So since he's Asur in all of the Kachim, not only in the Chalev, that's called an Isur Kail because he becomes Asur in not only the Chalev, but other things as well. So now you have 2 Isurim. One is Chalev and one is Atami Shachol Kedesh. Then it became Noiser, so now it becomes Asur Mizbeach. So that's called an Isur Meisif. And then it becomes Yom Kippur, and therefore he's also Chayav al Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur is an Isser Koil. But for Yom Kippur, he has to eat a Kisevis. Now, B'negei Me'ila, also, how does Isser Me'ila Chal on something that was already Asr? So again, Lepel, when it was Chalev, it was Asr, but it was Mutter B'Hano. Once it became Kachim, so now it also becomes Asr B'Hano. Not only Asr B'Achila, but it's also Asr B'Hano, because you're not allowed to be Nanim and a Hegdish. So being Asr Min Hano, that's called an Isser Moisef. Until now we're learning an Isser Moisef that it becomes Asr to other people. The Isser, this Isser is an Isser which is also Asr to other people, like we learned in Nida. Legabe Eishes Ach, she becomes Asr to her husband. Now we're saying that there's another gather of Isser Meisef, that Isser Meisef means she becomes Asr in a different way. It's not an Isser Koil. Isser Koil means it's including more things. It's including more objects. Over here, it's not including more objects. We're talking about the Guf HaDavar. That's another issue. L'chur, it's including the Me'ila, is also including the entire Behema. But the Mari Kurka says that he talks about the Isser Mitzad being an Isser Moisef. The Moisef is that it becomes also Asr Bahano. That's why it's called an Isser Moisef. So therefore, these are all 4 Isurim Achal, and therefore there's no problem of Ein Isser Chal Al Isser. So therefore, for eating this thing, the Tameh, She'achal Kedesh, that was nicer, and that was Achal Chelev, that was nicer, and it was on Yom Kippurim. So then he's chayiv arba chatois, plus he's chayiv also a korban me'ilah, because he ate it b'shegig. Halacha hei. Ha'oichel v'shoyse b'yom Kippurim b'helam achas, so he ate and he drank, is ein chayiv alachatas achas, because achilu shtia achasi, that's considered like he ate and ate. Halacha vov. Ha'oisem mulacha b'yom Kippurim shecholi is b'Shabbos, is chayiv shtei chatois, b'pnei shnei yisurim haboin ke'echad. As soon as Yom Kippur came along, it was also Shabbos. It was Shabbos and Kippur was chal together. So the Mele Shnei Yisurim Aboim Keachad. Halacha Zayin. Achel kechatzi zayis chelev, ukechatzi zayis dam behelam achas. As a nichayev korban. Shem sheini Yisurim mitzdarfim lemalkas. Just like the din would be that if a person would eat a chatzi zayis chelev and a chatzi zayis dam b'mezid, he wouldn't be chayev malkas because he didn't eat a shear of one iser. K'misha b'yarnu b'hilchas machalas asuras. Is kach ein mitzdarfim lekorban the same way they're not mitzdarfim lekorban. Locha ches. Ochel kechatzi zayis v'neidalei. And then v'chozer v'shochach v'ochal kechatzi zayis acher behelim sheni. So the din is potter. Shaharei neidalei bintayim, and the din is v'yesh l'yediyah l'chatzi shir. So machlekes in Gemara, but lepel the Rambam paskins that yesh l'yediyah l'chatzi shir, the fact that he knew about the chatzi zayis that he ate. So therefore, as a result of that, when he's going to eat the other chatzi zayis, that's not going to be mitzdaref to the first chatzi zayis, because that first chatzi zayis he already knew about it. V'chein im kosev eisachas b'shabbos b'shgaga and v'neidalei, and then v'chazar v'shochach v'kosev eishnias muchala, and it was behelim sheni. So again, it's potter mikor mechatos. V'chein kol ki yetz b'zeh. The nekud is that yesh yediyah l'chatzi shir. So if a person does a iser and he only did a chatzi shir, and then he was neidalei, and then he does another chatzi shir, so the two together would be a full shir. But since there was a yediyah mitayim, so therefore that first chatzi shir, which after the yediyah is not mitzdaref to the second chatzi shir. V'chein, the same din applies. Over here we're talking about he ate a chatzi zayis, or he wrote a esachas. V'chein im hoitzi shtei amas b'shegig. He was maver. Let's see, pashas over here means he was maver dal amas b'shusaram, and he was maver 2 amas b'shegig. And ushtei amas b'mezid, and the 2 amas was b'mezid, so there was already a yediyah. Ushtei amas b'shegig, and then there was a shtei amas b'shegig. So the din is as a im bezrika. If he did it bezrika, so in other words, he threw something. He threw it 6 amas. The first 2 amas he was a shegig. The middle 2 amas he was a mezid, and the last 2 amas he was again a shegig. So then he's chayiv. He's chayiv. You'll mitzdaref the first 2 amas and the last 2 amas, and they're chayiv. Lein mipnei she'en yediyah l'chatzi shir, el mipnei she'en biyadei la'achzira. So since ein biyadei la'achzira, so therefore we don't reckon this with this yediyah as being a yediyah l'chatzi shir. We'll get back to it in a second. Lefichach lehi'ilei ha'yediyah shebitayim. So that yediyah, a yediyah which he can't really change anything, what's going to happen was a normal yediyah of a chatzi shir is the pshat is he ate a chatzi zayis, and now he realized that he shouldn't have eaten that chatzi zayis. So now, when he goes ahead and eats the next chatzi zayis, so eating the next chatzi zayis is a new shegig. It's a new shegig because he already had a yediyah on the old shegig, and now this is a new shegig. So the new shegig is not mitzdaref to the old shegig. That's the din of yediyah l'chatzi shir b'pashtus. Masha'enkin, when a person throws something, so even though in the middle he knew about it, but the last 2 amas that it went, you can't say those last 2 amas that it went was a new shegig, because it went the last 2 amas as a result of the throwing that he threw before the first 2 amas. So Mela it comes out that the same shegig which caused the first two amas caused the last two amas, and therefore they're mitzaref, and the idea in between is not going to change anything because he's not able to stop it. So Mela, the last two amas is part of the original shegig of the first two amas. That's benigeya if he throws it. Masha'enken, if he was being maver, he was walking with it. He was walking with it. So over there, he knew about it after the two amas, and therefore now he forgot again at the next two amas, or the last two amas. So Mela comes out that the first two amas and the second two amas were done with two shegigim, because there was the idea being time. Since there was the idea being time, so therefore it's not mitzvah. However, in Bahavara Potter, if he did it Bahavara, knows, but he did two amas Bahavara, and then he went ahead, and the second two amas again he did b'shegig. But there was a idea in between. Let's say he was maver 6 amas. So the first two amas was b'shegig. The next two amas were b'mezit, so there was a idea, and the last two amas was again b'shegig. Like in the case of by the zrika. Over here, since Lepel was too shegigin, because he could have stopped, so therefore it's taka, it's considered that Yediyah is machalik in the Chatzi Shir and his potter. V'im ba'avara potter, sheyesh Yediyah l'Chatzi Shir, k'mei shebiyan. Let's read this again. V'chein, let's read this last piece again. V'chein, im hoitzi shtei amas b'shegig, he was moitzi shtei amas b'shegig, and then ushtei amas b'mezid, and then again ushtei amas b'shegig. So it depends. In Bezrika, if this was done Bezrika, he's chayiv. Lei mipnei she'en Yediyah l'Chatzi Shir. Generally, the rule is yesh Yediyah l'Chatzi Shir. So this yediyah is not a yediyah. The gather of yediyah l'chatzishir is because through the yediyah, the next shegig is a new shegig. Memela, it comes out that there was no one shegig on the entire shir. Mashenkin over here, there was mipnei she'ein biyadi lachzira. So therefore, the yediyah is not causing a new shegig. Lefichach lehiyilei yediyah should be time in order to make it into a new shegig. So it's all the arba amas was as a result of one shegig. However, in Ba'avara was potter. Sheyesh l'idiyah l'chatzi shir k'mei shebiyan. Now the Maisa is, the Rambam doesn't say this clearly, but it's poshut. I mean, so it's a Mefurish Mishnah, that if a person Mashal throws 4 amas, and by the first 2 amas he was a shegig, he didn't know about it, and the last 2 amas he was a mezit, which means the last 2 amas he knew that it was usher, so that's considered chilasi b'shegig v'sefer b'mezit. Even though Lepel, the last 2 amas, he couldn't have done anything. In other words, he threw it, and it was already beyond his control. But since Lepel, Bishas, the last 2 amas were happening, he was amazed. So that goes into the klal, what the Rambam said earlier, that Tchilasi b'shegig v'sefer b'mezid is potter. So therefore, we have to have a tzir where it was Tchilasi b'shegig and v'sefer b'shegig. So Memela, the tzir, that's the tzir of the Rambam that he had. He had a 2 were b'shegig. And then in the middle, there were 2 b'mezid. Now, if those 2 b'mezid were the end, so it would have been talking about potter. Because lepeil, ein achiname, ein yediyah l'chatzi shir, b'negeh by zrika, but over here the problem would be that would be seifei b'mezid. It's a chiddush that it's called seifei b'mezid. But that's the din. So therefore, the tzir has to be that he threw 2 was b'shegig, and the last 2 were also b'shegig, and therefore he did 4 amas b'shegig. But in the middle, there was a yediyah. Now, in the middle, there was a yediyah, but there has to be some time in the middle. So therefore, you're saying there were 2 amas b'mezid. So the mele there was a yediyah in the middle, and therefore, so there was a yediyah b'tchila, and there was a shegig b'tchila, and a shegig b'seif, and the yediyah in the middle is not mechalik because lepel that yediyah doesn't make the seif into a new shegig. Doesn't make the seif into a new shegig. Mashenkin b'havara, he did 2 b'shegig, and then he did another 2 b'shegig, and in the middle he did it b'mezid. So ein economic lepel the first 2 b'shegig, last 2 b'shegig could be mitzdarif. But the problem is that since in the middle there was a mezid, so obviously there was a yediyah. Since there was a yediyah, so it comes out that the last 2 amas is considered a new shegig and mamela. So that's the yesh yediyah l'chatzi shir. There's an issue. Why does the Rambam speak about 2 amas, 2 amas, and 2 amas? I mean, the Ramar brings him in Cheschinuch about it. But al derech haposhut, since we want to have a middle of yediyah, he can't stop. In other words, if a person brings chatzi shtei amas, and then he stops, and then he goes again another 2 amas, so then it would be a problem that it's not 4 amas basacha. So mainly you have to have a tzir where there was a yediyah, and it's still called one havara. So that's what the Rambam is saying. It's here. You brought 2 amas, you're walking 2 amas, and then you keep on walking, but in the next 2 amas you reminded yourself, and then in the next 2 amas you forgot. You again forgot. So over there by havara and aldara by zrika. you threw 6 amas. By the first 2 amas you didn't know it was a shegig. The last 2 amas was also a shegig. So it's chilasi b'shegig, v'sev b'shegig. In middle 2 amas there was the idea. So we're saying the idea in middle 2 amas by Havara is not machalik. Is machalik because he was able to stop. Memela, the last 2 amas is considered a new shegig. Mashenkin by Zrika, it's not machalik because he couldn't have stopped. Halacha tes ha'oichel kezayis chelev behelamachas. Bepashtus he's only chayav 1 because he ate 2 zeisim behelamachas. That's what we learned in the beginning of this parak. Now v'noidale al rishon, and then v'chazer v'noidale al hashen. He didn't find out about both of them together. First he found out about one, and then he found out about the second. So the din is maybe shtei chatois. He has to bring shtei chatois. Shahayidiyes machalkes, because yidiyes are machalkes and considered, since he found out about each one separately, that's also considered a chiluk, and therefore he's chayav chatos for each one. He wasn't mafresh a korban. It's not like he was mafresh a korban first, but rather he just knew about it, and then he knew about the second one. Now he knows about both of them. And Lepeil, he didn't bring any korbanos. He wasn't mafresh any korbanos. But nevertheless, he's chayav too. That's talking about if he found out about each one separately. If he found out about both of them at the same time, so then maybe chatasachas. So that's the normal din. The neidol al shteim keachas maybe chatasachas. That was the original din. That behelam echad you only bring chatasachas. The chiddush of this din is that yediyas machalkes. That the fact that he knew about each one separately, so that also is machalk. Even though originally it was done behelam achas. Then the Ram says v'chen yiroli shehu adin bebeilus. So Pash the Ram is going at the beginning of the halacha. There's the chiddush that yediyas machalkes is not only by oichel chelev v'chelev, but even by be'ilis. What's the chiddush? Why should there be a svara that yediyas machalkes are only in chelev and not in be'ilis? So we say they bring that by chelev be'etzem it's 2 pieces of chelev that he ate. Mechatchila he ate this piece of chelev and this piece of chelev. Mashem be'ilis, even though the ma'isa be'ilah were 2 ma'isa be'ilis, but it's ma'isa be'ilah in the guf echad. So meil over here there's a bigger svara, a bigger chiddush to say that yediyas machalkes, because they're being machalik something which is mamish beguf echad. Nevertheless, that's the Yeroli, that even though the original din where it says is benegei chelev v'chelev that yediyas machalkes by chelev echad, by two kezesim of chelev, so the din is yediyas machalkes. So the Ram is saying Yeroli that din of yediyas machalkes are also benegei beilis. Halacha yud achel kezayis umachze behelam achas and v'nedele al kezayis. The Vayla he only knows about 1 kezayis, and then v'chazer v'achel chatzi zayis b'halam mishul sheni, and then he went and ate a chatzi zayis b'halam mishul sheni. So there would be a svara to say that he knows about the first zayis, so he's chayav for the first zayis. Now the second, the half a zayis, the extra half a zayis, he doesn't know about. So l'chud there was no yediyah on that extra chatzi zayis, and now he went ahead and ate another chatzi zayis b'halam of that chatzi zayis. So just like we learned before, that we learned if you eat a chatzi zayis and then you eat another chatzi zayis, so that's considered even though you didn't eat it together, but lepel them it's starve. Now we learned if there was a yediyah, you ate a chatzi zayis and then there was a yediyah, and then you ate another chatzi zayis, so then yes yediyah lechatzi shir. But over here there was no yediyah on the chatzi zayis. There was only a yediyah on the zayis of the zayis v'chatzi. And l'chura there's an extra chatzi zayis that there was no yediyah, and now there's another chatzi zayis. So let them be mitzdarif, and it'll be chayiv another one mitzad the chatzi zayis of the original one and the new chatzi zayis. So on that he says no ein chayiv l'chatzi zachas she'ein chatzi zayis or achrin mitzdarif l'rish. Why? Aval pishu b'alamid, they're both in the same helm. There was no yediyah in between. Shari neidale al mitzvahs halom rishena, since he ate the zayis and the chatzi zayis together, and he was neidale on the zayis of the chatzi zayis. He was neidale on the zayis of the chatzi zayis of the zayis v'chatzi. So therefore, the chatzi zayis is kilu nichlal in that yediyah, even though he didn't know about it. But lepel it's nichlal in that yediyah, and therefore it's kilu like there's yet yediyah l'chatzi shir, just like if he would know about a chatzi zayis, and then he eats another chatzi zayis. He's not chayiv. The namet started the first chatzi zayis and the second chatzi zayis. So Haldera said this chatzi zayis, which was eaten together as a kezayis v'chetzi, and it was neidel on the kezayis of the kezayis v'chetzi, so it's kili he was already neidel on the chatzi zayis as well, and therefore the next chatzi zayis is not going to be mitzvah. Now this is talking about again that it was a kezayis v'chetzi, and he was neidel on the kezayis of the kezayis v'chetzi. Masha'enkin l'moshel, if there was a kezayis of kezayis, and then he was neidel on the first kezayis, but he wasn't neidel on the second kezayis. So then it's different. Then that second kezayis, you're not saying there was a yediyah on the second kezayis. There was only Yediyah on the first Kazayas. That's the next halacha. Halacha Yudalef. Ochal shnei zeisi chelu behelamachas. He ate shnei zeisi chelu behelamachas. V'neidel le'alachas me'am. And then v'chozer v'ochel kazayas acher b'halom mishul sheni. Now he went ahead and now he ate a kazayas acher b'halom mishul sheni. So he has 3 zaysim he ate. He ate the first 2 zaysim were one halama, and he found out about the first zayas, and he didn't know about the second zayas. And now we ate a 3rd zayas. So the 3rd zayas is really behelam shel sheni, and the first zayas is behelam shel sheni. Now there's a din which the Ram didn't mention yet. The Ram doesn't make it even a chidush, but maybe this is the chidush over here. That when a person, even though yediyas machalkis, which means if a person did 2 aver, he ate two zaysim of chelev behelam echad, and lepeil he was neidel le'alachas, and the chaz of neidel le'alachas. So the din is that he has to bring 2 chatois. That's what we learned, yediyas machalkis. But if, let's say, neidel le'alachas, and he went ahead and he brought a carbon on that achas. So when he brings a carbon on that achas, it's also niskaped the other achas which he didn't know about. Knows even though he brought a carbon, but by bringing a carbon, it's nischaper not only the one that he's bringing a carbon, but also the other kizayas which was b'halom mishorish. So it comes out if he was neidale and then he was chazav and neidale, so he became mechuyev 2 chatois. Masha'enken if he was neidale only on one, and then he brings a carbon on that one. So when he brings a carbon on that one, he's mischaperle also on the other one which was not yet neidale. So over here we have a tzir. You have 3 korbanos, and you have 1 carbon which is b'halami shel sheni, and then you have another carbon which the sheni is also b'halami. So in other words, the rishon and the shlishi aren't in the same helam. But masha'enkein, the sheni and the rishon and the sheni and the shlishi are all in the same helam. So this is the din over here. Nochama, let's start again. Ochal shnei zei sichil behelam achas, and v'nedol le'alachas mem, and v'chazer v'ochel kizayis acher b'halami shel sheni. And now, so you have 3 times he ate chelev. The first 2 were behelam achas, and the 2 and the 3rd were behelam achas. Now, the hevi chatas al rishon. He brought a chatas al rishon. He still doesn't know about the sheni. He brought a chatas al rishon. So the din is rishon v'sheni miskaper, because the sheni was behelam mishol rishon. Avol shlishi le miskaper, because lepeil he was neidele on the rishon before he did the shlishi. So the shlishi is not miskaper with the rishon. Elok sheyivod le'olav, when he finds out about the shlishi, so then yovi chatas acheres. That's din number 1. Now what about hevi chatas al shlishi? He brought a chatas al shlishi. So we're saying the sheni and the shlishi are the behelam achas. So then the din is shlishi v'sheni miskaper. So now the shlishi and the sheni miskaper. Sheshneim behelam achas, because they're both in the same helam. But the rishon le miskaper b'chatazu. The rishon is not miskaper b'chatazu. He's not miskaper b'chatazu because lepeil they're not in the same helam. So it's pashut. The shlishi and the sheni are miskaper. Masha'enke, the rishon is not a skaper. He's not in the helam of the shlishi. Now, hevi chatos al hemtzoy. He brought a chatos al hemtzoy on the middle one. So now it's shloshtem miskaper. So all 3 are miskaper. Mipnei sharishon v'shlishi are both the helam mishul sheni, the helam mishul hemtzoy, and therefore kshiivadale al rishon v'al shlishi ain't tzarich lahavi chatos acheres. Because once he brought a carbon on the middle one, on the middle chatos, so then he has to. Once he brings the carbon on the middle chatos, so side the rishon and side the shlishi when it's kaper. Now the Maisa says this last here is hard to understand because l'chura, in a case we're saying like this, he was neidel el rishon, and then he did a shlishi b'halom mishul sheni. So l'chura he was already neidel el rishon. He was already neidel el rishon. Now we did a shlishi b'halom mishul sheni, and now so we say like this: if he brought the carbon al rishon, so the sheni is mischaper. If he brought the carbon on the shlishi, so we can understand the shlishi and the sheni are miskaper, but the rishon is not miskaper. That we understand. But now you're saying he brought a carbon on the sheni, and we're saying the sheni and the rishon and the shlishi are all miskaper. L'chura, the rishon, there was already a yediyah between the rishon and the shlishi. So in other words, we have over here a ma'aseh that the rishon there was a yediyah, and then he did on the sheni the violet there was no yediyah, and then he did the shlishi behalam mishul sheni. And now we're saying he's bringing a carbon on the sheni. No, if he brought a carbon on the sheni, means now there was a yediyah on the sheni. So there was originally a yediyah on the rishon, and now there's a yediyah on the sheni. So we have the rule that yediyah is machalkes. That was the beginning of the halacha. We learned that halacha test that ha'echel gazai is chaylev v'neidel harishon v'chazav v'neidel ha'sheni. So he's chayiv too. So how could there be a tzir where he ate the first, and then and the second, and then he was Nedele al Rishon, and then he had the Shlishi B'Halom Shel Sheni, and now he was Nedele al Sheni, and he's being Mischaper on the Rishon and the Shlishi as well. L'chura Hakri Mischaper on the Rishon and the Shlishi. L'chura he was Nedele al Rishon, and now he's Nedele al Sheni. So l'chura Shnei Halamas, Shnei Yediyas, the Yediyas are Machalka. That's the kasha the Mishfarshim is. The Kesef Mishnah asks. So the teretz is, you have to say, that when he was Neidele al the Sheni, al Hemtzoi, he already forgot about the Rishon. He already forgot about the Rishon. So like it's a big chiddush over here. Whereas normally you'd learn that if it was Neidele al Rishon, he became Mechoyev for the Rishon. Now he's Neidele al Sheni, he's Mechoyev on the Sheni. Now the fact that he forgot about the Rishon when he was Neidele al Sheni, that's irrelevant. He's already in the Chayev on two. Now what happened? What would taka be the din? No, the din would be the normal din. Normal din is a person did two behelim echad, and he was neidele al rishon, and he brought a carbon. So he's niskaper saying the rishon and saying the sheni without a shlishi, a regular case. He's neidele al rishon, he brought a carbon on the rishon, so it's niskaper the rishon and the sheni. Now if it's neidele al rishon and then he was neidele al sheni, so he's mechuyev two chatois. That's clear. Yediyas mechalkes. What will be if he'll be neidele al rishon, and then he'll forget about the neidele al rishon? And then he'll go ahead and be Neidele al Sheni, and now he's going to bring a carbon on the Sheni. Will you say that the Rishon is also Miskaper? The Ram doesn't say that. But L'chura, based on this din, is coming out of Chiddush, that even though, when do we say that Neidele al Rishon, and then V'chaz of Neidele al Sheni, he needs to bring two chatois, only in a case when he's aware Sai of the Rishon, Sai of the Sheni. So then he has to bring a chat Sai for the Rishon, Sai for the Sheni. Masha'enkin, if it was Neidele al Rishon, and then he forgot about the Neidele al Rishon, and then he was Neidele al Sheni, and now he's bringing a carbon for the Sheni without being a Neidele al, without now being a Neidele al Rishon. Even though originally he was Neidele al Rishon, at that point in time he became a Chuyiv carbon for the Rishon. Nevertheless, the carbon that he's bringing for the Sheni could be mechaper for the Rishon, as long as right now there's no Yediyah of Rishon, which is a big chiddush l'chura. That this din, that Yediyas Mechalkes, is only in a tzir where the second Yediyah, and he's aware of both Yediyas right now, and therefore he's mechuyev in both. Masha'enkin, if he's not aware of the first Yediyah, and he's only aware of the second Yediyah, then he's not mechuyev. So then we understand that he was Neidele al Rishon. And therefore, as a result of that, the Shlishi wasn't really B'halom Mishal Rishon, because he was Neidele al Rishon. Then he forgot about the Rishon, and then he knew about the Sheni, and he didn't know about anything else. So, and he brought on the Sheni, so when he's Neidele al Sheni, and he doesn't know about anything else, so at that point in time, by bringing the carbon on the Sheni, he's mechaper, side the Rishon and side the Shlishi. That's a chiddush. Halacha Yud Beis. Mi she'achal chaticha mishtei chatiches. V'nestapik im achal chelev yishum. He's aware that there is a suffix, maybe he ate chelev. He's aware that there's a suffix, maybe he ate chelev. And now v'achal chaticha acheres mishtei chatiches. And again, v'nestapik he has a suffix if he ate chelev yishum. So we learned before that Yediyas is Machalkes, which means if a person did an Avera b'shegig, and then he realizes that he did the Avera b'shegig, and then again he does the same Avera again b'shegig, so he's chayiv two chatois. That's Yediyas Machalkes. Over here, there was no Yediyas Vadoi. He ate something, and now he realizes that maybe he ate chelev. And then he ate again something, and now again he realizes that maybe he ate chelev. And now he realizes that he taka ate chelev in both times. So the question is the pshat is that there was one shegig, because over here there was a shegig, over here was a shegig, and there was one yediyah. There was no yediyas machalkes. There was no yediyah later. We're talking about the yediyah of later. It's not machalkes. He found out together that he ate chelev both times. So mainly he's chayav one. Or do we say that since in between the first time and the second time he realized that maybe he ate chelev, so that realization that he maybe ate chelev, maybe that's also called a machalik, and therefore he's mechayiv two chatois. So that's the chiddush over here, that yediyah, that maybe he ate chelev is not considered a yediyah to be mechayiv two chatois. That's this halacha. Halacha Yud Beis. Misha achal chaticha mishtei chatiches. V'nestapik lei, imachal chelev yishum. And then again, v'achal chaticha acheres mishtei chatiches. And again, v'nestapik lei, imachal chelev yishum. And then v'achar kach neidlei bevadai, she'achal, she'chelev achal b'rishenu b'shniyah. So there was the idea about both of them at the same time. There was no idea about both of them at different times. The idea about both of them at the same time. So the din is eini chayiv al chatas achas. He's only chayiv one chatas. Why? She idea suffix shehoiseli bin tayim. The fact that in between the first chelev and the second chelev, he realized that he may have eaten chelev afal b'shem mechalekes lashamis. As far as an oshim toli is concerned, So that'll be mechalek like we learn behemshech. Abein mechalek is l'chatois. As far as chatois is concerned, it's not mechalek. So since now he's in a matzav that he knows for sure that he ate chaylev side the first time and side the second time, and there was no real yediyah in between the first time and the second time, because the yediyah was only a yediyah suffix. So therefore, right now, when he finds out that he ate chaylev both times, he brings one chatas.